Welcome to Chapter 3D. This is where we talk about the looping page in the setup menu. So first thing we start with here is input. Well, what does that mean? It just means what is the looper going to listen to? So in this case, it's listening to lead plus guitar. That's the default. So if you're singing and playing your guitar, it's going to loop both in that case. If we go over here, we can go to, oops, I moved away. You'll do that sometimes too. Okay, lead plus guitar. You can say, I just want the guitar. If you just want to loop the guitar part, you could set it to that. Like if you're the type of person who's singing all the time, you don't want to necessarily loop your vocals ever, but you want to have, say, a guitar part that you loop and then you can solo over top of that loop and then go back to your regular playing. That's a great way to use that. And then lead, just the lead vocal. And auxiliary, so that's going to just loop whatever's coming in off the auxiliary. And then, of course, lastly, we have all. So at any input that it hears, it's going to end up looping. Undo. So undo has on and off. Now if I change to off here, sorry, sometimes I go backwards in these menus, but if I change to off, essentially that means I have no more undo function available to me within the looper, but it buys me more time. So essentially you end up doubling your loop time if you turn undo off. So if you're really slick and you never want to have to undo anything on the layers, then you can get away with doing undo off. Now, of course, when we have clear and stuff available to us in the looping, in the more advanced looping, you can actually get away with still, you might make a mistake and you could clear that loop without actually deleting it. So if you were putting things on different tracks, you might have still more room to make a mistake on a second track and then say, oh, clear that track, I made a mistake. So you could still have the extended looping time with undo turned off. MIDI control has on or off. What that means is, do I respond to MIDI CCs? Can I be controlled, the looper itself, by MIDI CCs? Now this is independent of how you have the MIDI set up for the rest of your unit, because you may want to have program changes and all sorts of other things coming in, other CCs to control the box, but you don't want to accidentally start recording a loop at the wrong time. So you could say, hey, just the looper itself, don't respond to MIDI. I want everything else to work, but I don't want to respond to MIDI. Let's move over to filter resonance. That's filter reso. When you're doing loop filtering, when you're doing the slide back and forth, let's just do a really quick loop here. I know that we'll cover this in another section, but just to give you a really quick example. If you're filtering, it just means that the resonance of that filter is changed by this percentage. So you're going to want to experiment a little bit and find a resonance that works for you. We like 50% because that's setting it in the middle there, but you may like something better. Loop feedback. Now this is when you record a layer of loop and then you record another one on top of it. If each one successively increased the volume, eventually you're off into no man's land and your clipping and everything is distorting. So what we do is as each loop gets recorded over top, the next loop underneath gets played back at 98% of its original volume. So if you were to record, say, hundreds of loops that just keep going and going and going, eventually you probably wouldn't even hear the initial loop, or at least you hear it very, very quietly in the background. And it's just to try and maintain dynamic range without stacking the volumes on top of each other and then ending up blowing up the output. Queued mode. So queued mode means that it sits there waiting when you press record to come around to the next iteration of the loop in order for it to start recording. So I'll turn this on. I normally run it off, but I'll turn it on and I'll show you what I mean. So we've got this loop running here, right? So if I press play and I see it running through the loop and then I press record, it waits, and then when it came around, it started recording. And you can hear me talking. Now I cleared that loop because I did have undo turned off. But that gives you a sense of if you want it you want the next layer of loop to record at the beginning of the passage. So it's sort of waiting, it's waiting, it's waiting. Here comes the beginning and it's going and it's recording. That's what queued mode is for. So I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to turn my undo back on because I make mistakes in my loops and I like to keep undo on. That's the end of Chapter 3D.